Andrew. Please take it away.
All right. I appreciate it, Marielle. It's good to be back. I feel like we kind of took a break for a little bit. But the timing worked exceptionally because it kind of gave us some time to put together this course today. And frankly, I've been waiting to teach this course since the insurance market started getting difficult 3 years ago. I've been thinking about starting to come out on the other side and specifically being able to put some transparency out there once that started to happen. Now, obviously, everyone on our call today is incredibly familiar with how unbelievably difficult the insurance market's been for the past 3 years. The conversation we're going to have today is going to be a little bit different. It's definitely going to be a generally more positive conversation. We are, I think, kind of approaching what is going to be the peak in the market, and there's been a lot of changes, and not just in the insurance market specifically, but a lot has changed generally in Florida legally. There's been some bills that were passed that are kind of addressing some of the broader issues that have led to the unbelievably difficult insurance market we've kind of seen going back to 2019. So what just a little bit about me, and then we'll kind of get into this. I specialize exclusively in working with condominium homeowners associations. I graduated with a degree in risk management and insurance from Florida State. I know that can be polarizing at times teaching these courses, but it's the only school in the state that has the actual insurance program. So I'm a chartered property and casualty underwriter, very involved with the state association for insurance agents. I'm, of course, a state approved LCAM continuing education instructor, third generation insurance. So my mother was in it, my grandmother was in it. We have a 2-year-old in January who could potentially be fourth generation insurance. So we'll see how that goes. I was born and raised in South Florida, so I've seen quite a few storms. Very familiar, obviously, with the environment and with the insurance market here. So we're going to kind of break this course up, and when we were creating this new CE course, the structure of it was very important to me, because when we were entering the difficult portion of the market, what I found was that there was a lack of information, is probably a better way to put that. I think most everyone caught on pretty quickly that insurance premiums were going up and that it was a difficult market. But what I don't think was being communicated was why that was happening. And I think for everyone on this call, it's really important to not just understand what's happening, but to also understand why. I think that's a critical part of that conversation. So we're going to talk about what's actually kind of driving that. We're going to talk about some of the things that we're seeing change as far as trends, policy terms, pricing, that sort of thing, as we enter what will ideally be a more favorable market. We're going to talk about citizens. I know I'm probably that could be a sensitive subject with some of your communities. Citizens has grown exponentially and is a very critical part of the Florida insurance market, but they operate differently in a transitioning market. So, and then we're going to talk about navigating the renewal. So kind of knowing that the renewal is going to be much different this year than it was last year. What should you be doing differently as board members and property managers to kind of best position yourselves going in knowing that? So the 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 first thing that everyone has to understand about insurance, right? And this is across the board, and it's historically accurate, is that insurance is very cyclical. If you looked back at your premium for your community over a period of 15, 20, 30 years, you would very likely see years where premiums are going up and years where premiums are going down. Now, I'm not saying that it's always proportionate, right? I think what we just experienced was by far the most difficult market that the state has ever seen. And I don't say that lightly. Our agency was founded in 1919. So 105-year-old agency, and we have agents at Plastridge who have been consistently doing it for 60 plus years. Okay. And the consensus across the board is that what we just experienced was completely unprecedented. So while I'm anticipating that we're kind of approaching that peak and hopefully a transition to a more favorable market, I don't know that premiums will necessarily come down to where they were, but it's going to be very interesting to see if the market does start shifting, how aggressively. So what I think is, again, is really important for everyone to kind of understand is what happened, right? I think that's a very reasonable question when we say, okay, we just came out of the most difficult market in Florida history. Our community's insurance increased maybe 100% over a 3-year span. How did that happen? What transpired to result in that type of aggressive premium change? And there's really three pieces to this. I think there's kind of three primary drivers as to why insurance premiums increased so aggressively in such a short time span. The first one's, I think, the most obvious, right? When we think of why are insurance premiums going up, the first thought is natural disasters, right? Covered losses. And while we've been relatively okay in Florida, particularly South Florida, obviously Ian was catastrophic to the West Coast, but we have to kind of zoom out a little bit and understand that when we talk about insurance and when we talk about general premiums, the market is not just national, it's actually global. Okay, so when we think about insurance companies, the same ones that are covering us in Florida for our primary exposure, which is hurricanes, are also covering wildfires in California or earthquakes in Mexico. So we have to kind of look at the big picture when we talk about how this happened. And this graphic does I think a great job of summing that up. Now, what we're looking at here is a depiction of each $1 billion storm or event from 2023. Okay, so every event, whether it was a hurricane, a tornado, a fire, that cost insurance companies over $1 billion is listed on this map. Now, one of the really interesting statistics that the NOAA included with this graphic was 2023 versus the historical average as to how many of these we typically experience on an annual basis. And it's pretty compelling. And the statistic is that if you look at this number, how many $1 billion events in any given year, the 43-year average. So from 1980 to 2023, on average, we've seen 8.5 of those every year. The 5-year average is much different. from 2019 to 2023, the average for $1 billion events per year was 20.4. So it's an increase in the annual average of billion-dollar loss events from 8.5 to 20.4. It's a 2.5x increase in frequency. So it's really important to kind of look at that and say, okay, this is definitely a trend, and we're seeing more and more of these storms. So now, obviously, the timing of this CE course is very interesting, because today is September 18th, and we're kind of smack in the middle of hurricane season, and frankly, going into what is historically the most active hurricane season. Now, I know we said this was going to be a generally positive course, and it is. Up to now, the frequency of storms has been significantly less than what was forecast. So the early season, the preseason forecast was the most aggressive in history. It was for 25 name storms, 8 to 13 hurricanes, and 4 to 7 of those being major hurricanes, meaning category 3 or higher. So we're trending well below that, which is fantastic. But to make it a little bit relatable, I know I mentioned that I grew up here. I'm sure a lot of us on this call have been here a long time. Last week, I believe, is historically actually the most aggressive week for hurricanes dating back decades and decades. So this portion of storm season is when we've had all of these storms. To make it relatable, Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jean were the 04 storms, and then we had Wilma in 05, and Ian was a September 23rd storm. So this kind of from now until 11/1, we are holding our breath a little bit, but I preface our conversation with that today because a lot can change, right? This is a very fluid conversation, but we are seeing very positive trends. We've seen favorable renewals with our association, condo, and HOA clients, and I expect that to continue if we see this trend continue. So that's a major driver of this, the increase in frequency and severity of these losses. The second piece of this is inflation, and this is kind of everywhere right now. Obviously, it's an election year. This gets talked about even more so in election years, but generally, the cost of living has increased pretty significantly. We see that at the grocery store. Most of you have seen that have seen that updating your appraisals over the past 3 years. Whenever I do this course in person, I always get a feel, and I'll ask the question, raise your hand if you updated your appraisal and your values did not increase anytime in the past 3 years. And there's almost always 0 hands. And it's been the same with us. We've seen a significant increase in the cost of materials and the cost of labor. So this has been something that's very challenging for associations dating back to 2019, because not only have the rates increased, but when the values of your association go up, which is a good thing, right? But the downside is that it means you're also buying more insurance in addition to the insurance costing more. So this has kind of been these have kind of worked hand in hand in driving premiums up. And The third piece of this, and in my opinion, I think this is the most meaningful. I think this piece has been even more challenging for insurance companies, and frankly, I think this is why we've seen them leave in droves. It's litigation and fraudulent claims. And I know that I'm probably not surprising anyone that's with us today when I say we have a serious problem in Florida with fraudulent claims and fraudulent litigation, but I don't know that everyone has really gotten their arms around how meaningful and how significant of a problem, right? We all see the billboards driving down 95 all the time, but there's an unbelievable statistic that our insurance commissioner put in his 2019 state of the market report, which comes out once a year, right? It's basically a state of the market. Here are the issues. Here's what we need to do to fix it, kind of thing, that he's continued to reference in every annual report since. And the statistic is that Florida buys about 8% of the property insurance in the United States. Okay. But about 76% of all of the property insurance related litigation takes place in Florida, the country's litigation. So it's unbelievably disproportionate. We're talking about an environment where over 3/4 of the country's property insurance litigation has been concentrated to one state. That piece is critical because it's very, very difficult for an insurance company to navigate that. And we've seen the anecdotal evidence of that, right? I mean, there's a reason Citizens has grown from 400,000 policies to 1.7 million in 4 years. It's because private insurance companies have left the state in droves. I mean, I think we're at 19 insurance companies in the past 3 years that have either left the state voluntarily or worse, been deemed insolvent by our regulators. So that's been the problem. And these three things combined have created an environment that's been unbelievably difficult for boards and for property managers to navigate, because it's like anything else, right? Insurance is like any other market. If you boil it down, it's basic economics, right? When you have a market where supply has decreased significantly, right? The problem with that, when there's only a small pool of insurance companies that are writing in the state, the ones that are left are in a position where they can take these drastic premium increases. And that's why we've seen that from 2019 until present. The nice thing about this, right, is that we've identified a problem. And to be clear, when I say we've identified a problem, this is something that we've been preaching for years. You know, our legislators were way late on addressing this, I think, but the positive is that they did make some major changes last year that are aimed at this. And the idea with a couple of bills that were passed was to address the underlying legal environment that's made it so difficult for insurance companies to operate. And a couple of the things that were addressed, and these are kind of just some examples that will help everyone kind of understand, I hope, the types of mechanisms that we've had in place that that made it such an uphill battle. And one of these is one-way attorney's fees. Now, Florida historically has had something in place where our statutes were written such that if a policyholder sued their insurance company, the insurance company was prohibited per Florida statute from pursuing defense costs at all, no matter what. Now, the face value of that is good, right? The idea when that statute language was put into place was, okay, we have the individual policyholder and the massive insurance corporation, right? The logic was when there is a dispute or there's an issue with a claim, how can we level the playing field, right? How can we make this a little bit more fair of a fight for the individual policyholder? And that's great. But the problem that we saw with this, unfortunately, was that like anything else, there was a handful of unscrupulous legal firms that got unbelievably good at exploiting this. And the pitch that that was being presented to the policyholder was, let's sign here, let's sue your insurance company, right? Let's see what happens. Let's throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. And the issue was that the insurance companies were getting all of these types of claims, regardless of legitimacy, and we're in a position where they had to defend them, knowing that if they win the case, they're still on the hook for the legal expense. So it was a really interesting dynamic, and frankly, it's something that's very difficult to change without hurting the policyholder that has a legitimate claim where the insurance company is not doing the right thing. It's very difficult to separate those two, but unfortunately, this was a scenario where the bad started outweighing the good. And our with this tort reform, the one-way attorney's fees have been eliminated. So going forward, that has been removed. So another piece of this that was addressed that was highly problematic for 3 or 4 years was assignment of benefits. And some of you may be familiar with this. Some of you may have even recall being pitched this at one time or another, looking back a number of years. So the assignment of benefits is very specific. And basically what the assignment of benefits is, it's the letter that your association, that your board would be signing with the public adjuster or an attorney if they were going to act on your behalf with regards to an insurance claim. So this is kind of the agreement. And what this agreement does is very aggressive. And what was happening was there was not a lot of transparency around this. So the assignment of benefits letter, if your board signs one, or if I sign one for my insurance on at my home, what that does is whoever you sign that letter for, you are giving them full power and control over your insurance policy. So it includes the right to negotiate with the carrier, everything. So much so that when you sign an assignment of benefits letter, the agent is completely removed from the equation. So if you sign that one of these assignment of benefit letters, the insurance company stops communicating with us. So you can hopefully see how these things were very, very intertwined. Basically, the unscrupulous adjusters, and again, I probably should have prefaced this piece with there's good and bad public adjusters, just like there's good and bad insurance agents, right? But the bad ones, the unscrupulous ones, these things became very related. And the pitch was basically sign here, right? Sign up, we'll sue your insurance company. They can't come after defense costs, and we'll take this on contingency. So this was structured to literally be presented as no downside for the policyholder. Now, the piece of this that also did not get communicated, I feel, and what everyone should understand about public adjusters, and again, there's good ones and there's bad ones, but the reality is that they're compensated based on a percentage of the final claim. So you can see there's a very obvious incentive for the unscrupulous public adjuster to drag that claim out and inflate that claim as much as possible with the sole goal of getting that final number as high as possible. So the problem is that all of this together was creating this environment where the public adjusters were signing up for a long time as many policyholders as possible, whether there was a legitimate claim or not, to do this. And the issue was that there was no timeline. So the once you were signing that letter, the goal was to increase the volume as much as possible. So that really created a challenging environment, and the assignment of benefits was also eliminated with this new litigation. So these two things are very, very meaningful, and I think as a direct result of this, we are starting to see a pretty significant downtick in this type of litigation, this type of fraudulent litigation.
Andrew, I just wanted
Yeah.
to pause here if you don't mind. We have a bunch of questions relating to, is this pertaining to HOA particularly or the entire property insurance market?
This is everything, Marielle. It's the property insurance market, because the companies that are insuring HOAs are the same as the ones insuring condos. So
Awesome, thank you.
So one of the really interesting and perfectly legitimate questions that I get a lot is, okay, this is all well and good, but we know that this legislation was passed January 1st of 2023. So we're coming up on 2 years since these changes were made. And the question that I've gotten frequently is, okay, why the delay? Why did this take so long? We all know tort reform can take a while, but I mean, 2 years is a long time, right? We're still seeing premium increases. So what's going on here? And there's a really interesting timing aspect of this. And I think this helps kind of explain a little bit why we've kind of seen a lag until now. And if we zoom out, right, if we kind of look at the past 2 years and what it's looked like from a legislative perspective, when this finally started really, really getting talked about and taken seriously was in May of 2022. This was the first special legislative session that was called to have the conversation of, look, this is completely unsustainable. What can we do to start addressing these rates? That was in May of 2022. Nothing came of that. And I know that's not overly surprising. Our legislators met. The can kind of got kicked on that. Fast forward 4 months, September of 2022, Hurricane Ian makes landfall in Florida. And Hurricane Ian is the storm that devastated the West Coast, the Tampa, St. Pete area. This storm, what everyone has to understand about this storm is that it was a 55 billion with a B dollar event, covered losses. Okay. Perspective, that's the costliest storm to ever hit Florida and the second costliest to ever hit the United States behind Katrina. So this was an unbelievably meaningful storm for the property insurance market in September of 2022. Fast forward December of 2022, our legislatures meet again and they pass these bills, okay, where one-way attorney's fees and assignment of benefits are eliminated effective January 1st of 2023. The problem is that this was not retroactive. The new set of rules and these new guidelines were only applicable to claims filed after January 1st of 2023. Guess what happened between September of 2022 and January 1st, and particularly the 2 weeks right before January 1st, where this new set of rules applied? There were over 700,000 Hurricane Ian claims filed in that time period. Now, obviously, many of those claims were legitimate claims, and that was a catastrophic storm. But the problem is that many of them were not. And I personally had conversations with adjusters that were literally packing up and moving over to that area, renting office space. I mean, everything for the sole purpose of doing this. And this was almost like a last hurrah for this group of adjusters and attorneys. And the challenge that this created was none of these claims were going to be subject to these new rules. So we almost had this kind of tidal wave of claims that had to work their way through the system prior to really seeing results. And what happens in these cases was the insurance companies that left Florida, or the ones that kind of pumped the brakes on any new business, they kind of took the approach, look, we're fine sitting on the sidelines. We're going to kind of wait until all these claims settle, and then we'll evaluate and consider coming back into the market. So that's what the past 3 years has looked like. When I'm having these conversations, I really do my best to try and peel back the curtain and say, here's what actually happened. Here's why we've seen a delay. Now, the good news and the whole point of my putting this course together and trying to have this conversation as much as I can is because it's working. And we're seeing significant decreases in the amount of litigation, what that litigation looks like, the amount of money insurance companies are having to reserve for claims on an average basis. I mean, some statistics are showing this type of litigation decreasing over 60% in the matter of 18 months. So this is what we've kind of been waiting for. This is what I've been saying for 3 years, is that there has to be competition for premiums to start coming down again. And there's not going to be competition until these insurance companies look at the market and say, okay, we think we can operate profitably now. And that's happening finally. And this is the refreshing part of the conversation. And I say refreshing because the past 3 years has been very repetitive, and I know that I'm preaching to the choir with everyone on this call, but the theme that I want everyone to kind of come away from this with is the market is kind of geared up to start transitioning positively. We've seen numerous companies enter the market. For the first time in what feels like years, we're meeting with our clients and we're seeing more than one option in most cases, and even moving quite a few of them away from Citizens. So it's very different. I think it's leading to a very different market. This comparison is very specific, but I put this up here because this is a renewal that I did with an association client 3 weeks ago, and it looks much different than their renewal last year. Now, I'm definitely not saying that everyone's going to have 7 options and we're all going to be looking at these major year-over-year decreases. But what I can say is that this particular association, and it's newer construction, inland a bit, but last year when we did this renewal, we had a Citizens option and a very, very expensive Lloyd's of London option. So this year, same underwriting characteristics, we had 7 quotes for consideration. So again, this is a very specific and anecdotal example, but this is a great sign. It has literally been years since we've been sitting down and having conversations like this. So I think I'm gonna take a quick look at these, at some of these questions, because I want to make sure we're keeping up
Yeah, we
with
have
them.
some good ones,
Yeah.
but you tell me what
So yeah, okay. So some of these questions are kind of with regards to that, to the assignment of benefits and the one-way attorney's fees, and kind of how that impacts the policyholder. And these are great questions, and frankly, it's a difficult thing to tackle, because you can't really change something like that without hurting the policyholder that has the legitimate claim that's not being handled properly, right? Because that's who the legislation was created for. It was created to put that specific policyholder on a level playing field. But the problem is, if you're going to take those advantages away from the policyholder, you kind of have to do it all or nothing, because it's very difficult to distinguish between that for these insurance companies. So when they eliminate the things like one-way attorney's fees and assignment of benefits that do help the legitimate claim. The problem is the good has kind of started outweighing the bad. So it's a very difficult thing to navigate. And I think that's probably why it took our legislators so long to begin with. I saw another question with regards to deductibles. Most of your communities in the past 3 years have probably not only seen an increase in pricing, but also inferior terms. And I know that's difficult to stomach because it's not, you would think that wouldn't be logical, but we in the past 3 years, most of our associations have gone to the 5% deductible. I will say more insurance companies are willing to offer the lower deductibles. So, knock on wood, if everything continues trending positively, storm season wise, and all of that, and we start to see a shift into the down cycle of the market, I think we very well could see not only a stabilization or decrease in pricing, but also in deductibles. So I would definitely encourage everyone to kind of put that on their radar and ask that question at renewal for sure. So I know we're gonna end up getting pretty close on time most likely, but a big part of this, right? When we shift to a positive market, when we moved to the hard market, a huge part of that is Citizens, right? Citizens has grown from 400,000 to 1.4 million. Most of your associations that are on this call are probably with Citizens. Now, the opposite is true when we transition into what we call the soft market. And the what you have to understand about Citizens is that they're the market of last resort, and some of the and one of the mechanisms that they have in place to make sure of that is they kind of have this back door where Citizens essentially opens their books to private insurance companies and says they don't share premiums, but they say, okay, here's the file, here's all of the underwriting information, have at it. If you want to provide a quote, go for it, and we'll send it to the policyholder for you. The reason I put this in here is because since April of last year, there has been about 400,000 insurance policies that were written with Citizens that have been assumed by other companies. We call them takeouts. When an insurance company quotes something from Citizens and then just assumes the policy, it's called a takeout. What I would encourage everyone to kind of put on your checklist after we, or as we kind of talk through all of this, is that the way Citizens is doing this is a little bit sneaky, for lack of a better phrase. And the I say that because if your association gets a takeout offer from a private insurance company, that notice will come in the mail. Your agent should get one too. But if you don't respond to that letter, then your policy automatically gets taken out. Now, if the offer is good, non-issue, right? If we're moving from Citizens to American Coastal and the coverage is better, which it almost always will be, and the pricing is better, or even if it's slightly more expensive, great. That's all well and good. The issue is that if you're paying $200,000 for your property insurance with Citizens, if you get a takeout offer for $450,000, if you don't respond to it, and say, we're electing to stay with Citizens, they will automatically take your policy out and move it to the private company. There's no going back. So we're starting to see these a little bit more frequently. All of this is to kind of say, look, if you're creating kind of a list of things to keep in the back of your mind, if you get something in the mail from Citizens, open it. I know the tendency is to toss it, but staying ahead of this kind of stuff can be critical. Citizens is also, and by the way, I never imagined that I would be saying this, but as the market has started to transition to a more positive environment, and Citizens has started to act even more like the last resort. It's a really backwards business model, right? Because on paper, they don't want to write your policy. So as the market has gotten better elsewhere, Citizens is tightening up. They're becoming more selective. They're requiring additional information. For example, if you're looking to move coverage to Citizens new business, they're requiring an appraisal no older than 12 months, which for HOAs has always been the case, but for condominium associations, historically they've followed the statute 718, which is 3 years. They're not doing that anymore. They're basically throwing the statute out and saying, if you want to move coverage to us, your appraisal has to be no older than 12 months. They're getting a lot more strict with the milestones and the recertifications. Citizens is basically following city and county and state ordinance. So whatever you're required to do, Citizens is going to require, and they won't write the policy without it. Citizens is also becoming much more selective with roofs. And this is something that some of you may be intimately familiar with, and or maybe have had a less than positive experience with over the past 3 years, but they're getting even more obnoxious. And I think obnoxious is the right word, and it's a very intentional word, because some of the stuff that they require is painful. And a great example of this is a recent change. Citizens a number of months ago changed their guidelines to where they're no longer accepting photos taken by a drone at all whatsoever. So, the logic is that Citizens wants the inspector on the roof taking the photos. I've had very specific conversations with them, verbatim, talking about this, where I've said, okay, we will literally fly the drone 6 feet high on every roof, exactly where the inspector's camera would be. And I literally had a scenario where they kicked one back because they couldn't see the inspector's shadow in the picture. So it's one of these examples of Citizens and how challenging and inefficient they can be to work with. I say this to kind of reiterate to everyone that you should be hopefully starting this very, very early. I mean, if your renewal is 6 months from now, I would encourage you to start talking about this with your agent. There's a lot of things that you can do proactively, and we're starting to have a lot of these conversations now, because we kind of consider now until kind of end of November budget season, where we're basically, I'd say spending about half of our time working through budgeting and having very thoughtful meetings around all of this. Not just numbers, but also what do we need to do to best position our community going into this renewal, knowing that it's going to be a much more positive renewal, because it is. We're going to be in a much different market if these trends continue. And meeting and having these conversations early lets you do a number of things. First off, it lets you talk through the budgeting, and the budgeting process is very interesting. I This is obviously a very, very general budget conversation because it's different for everyone. But I mean, we're always prefacing the conversation with, we're still inside of storm season. A hurricane is a major variable, but I mean, depending on the scenario, our budget recommendations for some communities conservatively have even been, 10 to single digits to maybe no increase, depending on the scenario. Again, that's very, very broad, and there's a lot that can happen between now and then to change that, but it's a very different conversation. So I'd encourage you to start that conversation very early. Start talking about your roofs, whether or not there's additional inspections that need to be done, appraisal. The feedback that I'm getting from appraisers is still that values are going up. The feedback that I've gotten primarily is nothing like we've seen over the past 3 years, that it is starting to cool down a little bit, but values still going up. So when you're having these conversations, I would encourage you to keep that in mind and factor that into the bottom line. And then I know this piece of it sounds redundant and sounds obvious, but when you're budgeting, or if you're having kind of a pre-renewal conversation like we do with a lot of our clients, make sure that if you're investing in the community, if you're updating roofs or installing impact windows or doing roof coatings or maintenance or whatever you're doing, make sure that you're communicating that to the agent. And again, I know that sounds silly, but I can't tell you how many times I've started working with a new association where they replaced their roof in 2020 and that wasn't being communicated to the carrier. I mean, all kinds of scenarios like that. So it's important. And then having these conversations early, what it also does is it lets you get ahead of what these new companies are potentially needing to quote. Because here's the thing, there's a number of new companies. GeoVera, US Coastal, Care, there's a number of very aggressive companies that are quoting property insurance for condominium associations and homeowners associations, but they all have their own set of guidelines, right? So if you're sitting down and you're having these conversations early, you can make sure you're getting ahead of putting together all of the documentation you might need to make yourself eligible for alternative quotes. And some of them are pretty aggressive. Like for example, one of the newer carriers is requiring 3 years worth of board meeting minutes. So it's different for every carrier, and getting ahead of that is important.
Andrew, I just want to pop in for 1
Yeah.
second. I just want to let everybody know before the end of the hour. I know Andrew will stay on and go through some more of this, maybe answer some questions, but in the chat, you'll see the evaluation link. If you didn't see it earlier, Jeff just posted it one more time. So just make sure to click that, grab it. If too many people are submitting at once, you may have a little bit of trouble submitting. Just wait a few minutes, try again. You'll also receive that in an email, I believe tomorrow, just in a thank you email for joining us. So in case you don't get to it right now, but I want to make sure you guys know it's in the chat. Thanks so much.
Perfect. That's good. The timing is good because we're wrapping up. The last thing that I want to emphasize for everyone, and again, I know this sounds a little bit obvious, but if you're considering making significant improvements to the community, right? If you're sitting down with your agent and you're saying, okay, what does it look like if we replace our roof? What's the premium difference if we do it and if we don't do it? And deciding that doing something like that makes sense, I would encourage you to start that very, very early. And I would encourage you to get everyone involved in that process. Insurance agent, attorney, CPA, everyone, because there's certain things you can do and there's certain programs that are out there. For example, the My Safe Florida pilot program, it is a pilot, but it's very interesting, and there are some grants and things out there like that. So make sure you're getting everyone involved. You can do this kind of thing one of two ways, efficiently and inefficiently, and one of them is a lot more stressful. So I would encourage everyone to make sure they're doing that. So I know that's a lot of information, and the webinar format is always a lot of information packed together. So I know we're right on the hour, but the questions, Marielle, do you mind? I mean, I'll stay on however long to run through some of those if there's.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a bunch of different questions. Maybe we'll, I hate to start from the bottom, but some of these are from much earlier in the presentation.
Sure.
Let's see, we do have a few just about like things that could impact premium. So,
Sure.
and this one's a little bit more maybe for legal. Will I, as part of an HOA, be forced to buy impact windows and doors to comply with the new laws? None of us are lawyers here. I encourage you to reach out to KBR, who's our great legal partner. But if you have any insights on that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the feedback that I could give is I've seen homeowners associations require it, but yeah, the logistics there are, it comes down to what your governing documents allow, and that's going to be more of a legal question. It
Okay.
does impact the premium very positively.
We do have a couple others about premium. So what are the top considerations condominiums can I assume use to reduce cost of a new policy, i.e. new roofs when mitigation completion of the 30-40 year recertification, etc.?
Yeah. What I would say about this market that may be a little bit different than soft markets we've seen in the past is I don't think the underwriting is going to go out the window, right? I don't think we're going to see companies just say, okay, we'll write everything, particularly because of the Surfside collapse and a lot of new requirements for that. So what I think is probably going to happen is I think most of what was mentioned in that question, the milestones, the SIRS, I think that's basically going to be required. I don't know that there's going to be a premium benefit to doing those types of things. I think that's going to be more, you have to do these types of things and you have to comply to get insurance. Now, as far as what will impact the premium, it's kind of still more the big ticket items right now. It's like replacing roof, installing 100% impact windows. So those are heavier lifts, but what I would encourage you to do, it's always worth having the conversation, is ask your agent. I mean, I all the time, will provide two sets of budget estimates. One if we renew as is, and one if we replace the roof or do impact glass, so you can actually quantify it and decide what makes sense.
what that return on investment might be.
Exactly.
That's one of the questions here is, is there a legitimate return on investment through premium reductions on things like storm windows and large installations? So
Yeah.
it makes sense. Let's see. We had a couple of questions on roof replacement. Homeowners are seeing insurance carriers getting stricter on roof age and replacement. Are HOA condo carriers taking this approach for covered common area buildings? If HOA reserve calculations go out for 16 to 18 years, will these estimated years need to be altered?
Yeah, what's really frustrating is that the insurance companies' requirements and guidelines are much different than what the reserve study says or what the warranty says. And it's it's uh it's it's very backwards because I've worked with associations where the roof is 15 years old and in great shape, and the warranty is still valid, and the insurance company doesn't care. So the to be honest, that stuff is helpful, but it's not always going to change the insurance company's opinion. They're kind of unrelated.
Let's see. Similar with the roofing question, is citizens requiring roofs to be less than 16 years old?
I would say it depends on the time of day and it depends on the underwriter that answers the phone. I mean, citizens is like, it's obviously it's a state program, but I always say it's like working with the DMV in that the consistency there is just unbelievably across the board. So on paper, right, their guidelines say that flat roofs need to be 15 years or newer. Hip and gable roofs need to be 20 years and newer. Okay. For shingle. If they're tile, they give a lot more useful life. But there's kind of this caveat there where we'll just use flat roofs, for example, because I know the question was 15 years. The citizens guidelines say they need to be 15 years old unless you get a report done, an inspection done by a licensed roofer or a licensed contractor that says there's remaining useful life. Now, the problem is that once citizens gets that letter, they may or may not approve it. So if it's a 16-year-old roof, you have to get that letter from a roofer because it's older than 15 years, stating that there is remaining useful life. So say he puts 5 years on it, great. Then you send it to citizens, and honestly, that's when the gloves come off and the agent has to start battling citizens to get it approved because, like I said, and I know I'm kind of half joking, but not really, because there's literally times where we will call citizens and get an underwriter that, because it's not, you can't call a specific underwriter, you just have to call. And if it's the wrong underwriter, and I know within 15 seconds, I literally sometimes will just get off the phone and call back and try again because it totally depends on the underwriter. So I know that's not a great answer to, do the roofs have to be 15 years? It's variable.
No, I appreciate you walking through that. We have another one. Since Charlie, most INS agents have used the hardship in the Florida market not to get a comprehensive quote from various carriers stating low competition. How many quotes from carriers should a good insurance agent get for a condominium insurance renewal now?
Super difficult question
They
because
all are, Andrew.
I know the example that I showed, and that's why I kind of alluded to this when it was on the screen, is a unique example. I mean, they were newer construction, inland, but I put it there though because it's a good sign. Now, as far as what should we expect, man, I would say on average, I'd be surprised if most of our associations didn't see multiple options. And I know that sounds like a low bar, but there have been a lot of coastal particularly high-rise buildings the past 3 years where it's literally citizens or nothing. So I'd I'd say, you know, when you start getting inland 5 miles or more away from the water and maybe newer construction, I think you're gonna see maybe 3, 4+ options. I think that's maybe that kind of sweet spot for when the market is starting to shift. So, but I know that's a pretty broad answer, but I think it's the best I can give you.
What about for buildings that are over 60 years old or those older buildings? Are you seeing insurance coverage options for those older buildings?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing options. You know, what I would say is that when the market shifts, right? When we go from hard market to soft market, what always happens is the insurance companies that are coming into the market are in a very unique situation, right? Because everything is with citizens, or most associations are with citizens. So they get to kind of pick and choose in the beginning. So the initial impact of a market transition is usually felt by newer buildings or buildings with newer roofs or impact glass. So those associations are usually the first in line, and then it kind of keeps shifting. So older buildings, yes. I mean, I don't have a single client where we haven't been able to find coverage. I mean, that's not, you know, something I've experienced, but when we talk about multiple options and for the older coastal, maybe older roof associations, it may be a little bit longer.
Okay, excellent. Do you serve Pasco County?
Yes, we're across the state.
Awesome. You had mentioned a couple companies at the very end. Are those companies, we have a question, are those companies just mentioned admitted?
No, no, they're not. Some are admitted, some are non-admitted. It's so admitted, super brief kind of synopsis. Admitted carriers are backed by FIGA, the Florida Insurance Guarantee Association. So God forbid if we have the catastrophic storm and an insurance company goes under, if they're admitted, you have that cushion. Non-admitted, you don't. So now, I would say though, generally in Florida right now, most of the companies operating are non-admitted. I think there's 2 or 3 that are admitted. Interestingly enough, and this is kind of more of just like a fun fact, interesting piece of the market. Citizens, the state program is not admitted. So obviously they're a part of the state, you know, so it's hard to imagine there's not some sort of backing there, but on paper, they're not admitted. So,
We have some more questions, a few more questions. We have one, let's see. Can you explain what a condominium has as enhancement parts of a policy and what are required by state statutes, i.e. law and order ordinance? Is it required? Do most condos have it? Is it for windstorm or property such as fire?
yeah. Yeah, this has come up a lot in the past 3 years because a lot of associations have started asking, which, and by the way, perfectly legitimately, I'd be asking it, do we have to buy the insurance? It's gotten so crazily priced. And or do we have to buy all of it? Like, can we buy a lower limit? And that is more of a legal question, but what I can say is that the statute language 718, and I'm paraphrasing, but it basically says something along the lines of the condominium association has to purchase full replacement cost limits as determined every 36 months by an appraisal. So now wind was mentioned, and I've gotten asked this a lot. Okay, does the statute require wind coverage? Obviously, that's the expensive portion. The statute does not specifically list the word wind. Okay. The legal opinion that I've heard most attorneys give is that yes, it includes wind. So I mean, that's the feedback that I've heard most attorneys give. So what I've kind of heard on this in 3 years is, yes, we have to buy it, and yes, we have to buy it to the full limits.
And again, I just want to reiterate because there is a lot of crossover between legal and insurance, and many of the other webinars that we posted this summer is, I encourage you to reach out to your counsel and consult them on these things. None of us are attorneys, and certainly not giving out legal advice here. So, I encourage you. We have KBR, K Bender Rembaum was a great partner of ours. You can find them in the directory on acebytsk.com. So I encourage you to reach out. They've done some great seminars this summer for you guys. You can watch on the Resource Center. But I do appreciate all of the color you're able to fill in, Andrew.